Welcome back to your favorite podcast at the edge of innovation. It's Disruptive AF with myself, Trigger Jordan, and Dan Hulter. Hello, Dan.
Hey, what's up, Trigger? How you been?
Dude, it's been really good. In fact, we're not going to digress into it, but I've learned a lot about Oregon Trail in the last several hours. It's awesome.
I'm just sad that we weren't recording for the Oregon Trail portion of this. Maybe
for
we
all
should
of you
just
listeners,
revisit that topic.
You're just gonna have to be sad and go back and watch the outtakes this sometime, because Oregon Trail, that's where it's at. It was the original innovation. Oregon Trail, the game. Okay, anyway, we're not here to talk about Oregon Trail. We're here to talk about the awesome people that are making defense innovation.
That's for our other podcast, the Disruptive Oregon Trail AF podcast.
No, dude, it's so good. Well, today with us here to argue the intricacies of Oregon Trail in the Defense Innovation Network, man, it's awesome. We got Trish Marshall here, who has been not only innovation project manager for the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center, but also develops and manages projects that focus literally on providing solutions, technologies, comprehensive training, all of the goodness to the organization. So Trish, welcome to Disruptive AF and your central focal point of Oregon Trail, for sure.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got tied into the innovation network, if you will, and what that means for really ISMC. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk. For AFIMSC, and really where that begins for you.
Yeah, so IMSC is definitely like alphabet soup. So I usually just take off the AF because it's on all the letters. But I actually am a reservist. So I started off, I was active duty for a while in Intel, and eventually got out once I had a family, and we been bouncing around, and husband is about to retire. So we moved back to San Antonio, which is where we're from, and decided to, I was full-time active duty and decided to get out and find a civilian job. And that's kind of where I ran into this awesome job posting on USA Jobs. It was like, we need innovation and something. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I threw my name in the hat and got connected and interviewed and found this like unicorn of a job is what I call it, because it's from leadership to the airmen who are putting ideas out there. It's really like an enterprise approach of trying to make the installation and mission support groups better. And so we have wide lanes to go run after things and projects, and great team to spitball things off of to figure out how to get to yes.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit, like, I'm curious. I don't think that I've actually engaged directly with IMSC at all, or any of their products, and maybe partially that's because I tend to be on, in tenant units, as I'm an Intel person myself, so we tend to be on like Army bases and stuff. Can you just give us an overview really quick of what kind of the IMSC domain entails, and so that that might give us an idea of what lanes you've been pursuing in the innovation realm?
Sure. We always like to say that for Installation and Mission Support Center is what IMSC stands for. And we really focus on the mission support group. That's kind of our sweet spot there. So that includes civil engineers, includes the defenders, it includes services and contracting. Then underneath them, there's the firefighters, there's EOD, there's chaplains. So there's just all these layers. So we like to think, when you think of a base, that's us. So like, we're not maintainers, we're not the pilots, we're not kind of that ops side of the house. We're everything to enable people to get after their mission on the base.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So within those, clearly there's a lot of room for innovation. Do you want to touch on really quick what some of the specific innovation like that you're excited about your organization pursuing, or that you've been managing personally?
Yeah, so we stood up in 2019, and we kind of took a spin off of Shark Tank and did this thing called the Innovation Rodeo. And we always joke that has a Texas twang because we're down in San Antonio. And we actually just did a call out and idea scale for airmen in the mission support group that could come up with ideas that could be executable in under 2 years. And from there, we had some top 3 ideas, and we didn't really have any like perimeters. So it was just as long as it fell within the MSG and it voted well on idea scale. And so some of those ideas were a app for updating the way people get information on social events at USAFA. So it had, the commandant and a cadet come out and present it. We have a app that's going to help the Corps, so the contracting officers, get better data on what contracts are being serviced on base. And those were kind of the first year projects. For the second year, we actually had another app. There's always a big demand signal for technology improvements to help dual working or single parents or parents to get their child's spot sublet into a fluid process. Right now, I guess when people are trying to get ideas or get childcare positions that they can like sublease out, they'll post something on Facebook. So now they're coming up with a standardized process to help come after and, help airmen find spots that they can like put their kids in temporarily. And then another project they're doing is a Roomba for the Air Force on the airfield. So allowing the mowers to go out and, maintain the fields while at night. So you're lowering the hazard duty with, BASH. And then the other one is for augmented reality to look for like cables and wiring underground. And so those are kind of like different areas across the different centers that we have within IMSC. So that one, the first one was in services, the second one was in CE, and the third one also is in CE. And so those ideas kind of just show like the variety of ideas that airmen are bringing together to support the mission support groups.
Yeah, and these are all the another interesting thing about these is that, and it makes me think of the necessity for being human-centered and introducing like human-centered design into these processes, is the fact that all of these are the domain of the mission support group or the subsets, CE, the services or defenders, but the actual customers are people who might not even be aware of who is overall administering those processes, which kind of speaks to the need for, like you described, a process for getting those ideas from airmen. Has it just been the idea scale campaigns, or are you pursuing other ways of doing innovation management and getting the right ideas pursued by those innovation organizations?
So something that's unique about IMSC is we cut across all MAGCOM. So we're not just tied to a specific MAGCOM or a specific mission set. And because of that, it kind of like gives us a position to have that enterprise lens. And with that, when we started off in innovation, we always joked that it was the Wild Wild West or Oregon Trail, as we said earlier. And we saw a need for a base down in, California or somebody over in Langley to be able to see where like there's like similarities across what defenders or CE is doing and like opportunities to collaborate. Because sometimes people have great ideas and they don't have money, or they have money but they don't have people. So with that, we kind of started coming up with a digital innovation dashboard, which is called the DID. And we were able to get buy-in from not only like the spark cells that are within the mission support groups to provide this like project management life cycle to help track where projects thrive, where they die, heat maps to show like, oh, there's two ideas that are super similar. Maybe instead of us going after two software solutions, we combine efforts and actually see how we can bring things in properly with the program offices. And then, oh, by the way, we need to transition it. So we've brought these stakeholders in. So the MAGCOMs are involved because they want that enterprise view. But then we also have the squadrons using it so airmen are empowered to make informed decisions. And so, being an IMSC has kind of enabled us to have that ability to cross all the MAGCOMs and say, hey, this is where we want to go. Who's in? Why reinvent or create three different project management tools that are pretty similar? Let's all combine efforts and, try to make this first stab at it a success.
Yeah. How much is that? Has that just kind of been locally within IMSC?
No. So actually it came together at AFWERX Vegas. Is we had a couple day brainstorming session. And And we had some conversations with different Spark cells about this need, but really, we didn't want to create just something that would work for IMSC. We want people, because our airmen go to all different MAGCOMs. So we want that tool to feel similar wherever they go, because it's about like setting standards that are loose that work with innovation, but then providing that continuity. So that's kind of where we took it to, was the MAGCOM, so then it could be an Air Force-wide tool.
This one of those pieces, actually, I've heard this conversation several times, where people have been just hungry for something that would be kind of that aggregate feel to everything that's been going, all the projects of what's going on. And when you look at all the different areas, like what a real challenge. This is something that was kind of talked about even a year ago, in multiple different ways. What a challenge to be able to get a product that everybody is able to use in some capacity, to be able to track not only the tools that they're doing, but also kind of projectively what they're planning on doing in the future. That's huge. I mean, that's huge. And what a integral tool for people to be able to utilize moving forward. Because, as we've talked about several times, just on DisruptiveAF, like a large majority of what people are having to do is find that network and grow that network and find out who's working a congruent program or project that they are, and how can we capitalize on banding together to be able to make this happen. Because I think we all know, programmatically, money-wise, when you're talking about building a program, it's so much easier when you have multiple bases who have a need, and the MAGCOMs can get involved and say, hey, there's something here. It's really difficult when it's just one Spark cell. So the applicability of what that has moving forward is huge, because now these need areas that we have had and units have had for a long, long time finally will be recognized. Whereas if you don't have that kind of unified vision or unified place for the aggregate data to go, and the projects to be identified, man, you lose it. And it seems like an individual problem instead of a systemic problem that everybody's trying to solve.
For sure. And then something that's like what we're really trying to get after in IMSC is, as we've matured in an innovation office and field, is we're trying to be able to show how our micro innovations tie to that bigger picture. So if I'm automating, giving you a frictionless entry on the base, how does that play into the base of the future, right? So now with the DID is what we call it, is now we're trying to build those metrics and data that actually have the so what, and we're not just reporting for reporting's sake, but like to tell the story of how we're, maintaining and growing the gap and that competitive edge for our peer and near peer actors. And so really, as innovation starts to mature and we get the MAGCOMs on board with being able to have that same narrative running on these micro innovations and why it's important to invest in squadrons and, Spark cells ideas, this will kind of like allow that narrative to happen with like the meat and potatoes once personalities leave.
Yeah, that's such an important idea, is getting alignment to what is the actual point of what we're getting after here. And there's a couple of pieces to that. I think it's how does this tie into the mission, but also how does it tie into the continued motivation and involvement of your airmen? How does it tie into talent management? And all of these are interconnected pieces. So I think there's a whole lot of potential in that idea of the innovation, the digital innovation dashboard, and using some kind of transparency mechanism to make sure that we're all aligned. Because I've seen a couple of people try and get after it, and really, I don't think that anybody's really gotten it quite yet. So can you tell us where you are in that process and some of the success that you've seen so far?
For sure. So in the process, we just finished out our phase 1 customer discovery, and it was really interesting going to each MAGCOM to get buy-in, because everyone has a vision. Everyone knows this is a need. And so what it looks like for AETC might be slightly different for ACC. And what IMSC wants, people were worried that we were going to make it just for us. And so the story over and over again, and even when we were trying to get our stakeholder list together, was don't say no. Come to it with an open mind, hear why we're trying to build a foundation, and then let's go from there. And so the process has been really trying to find those people who are willing to listen and come at it, not with their MAGCOM hat on, but with the Air Force lens. And so that's kind of who the team's been constructed with. And it's kind of really cool because, as you've seen, I'm sure in the innovation space, it organically grows. And so I will send it to one person. They're like, oh, you need to put this person and this person on it. And then you do the same sales pitch. You're like, well, what about this and that? I'm like, this is not a tool of all things. We just need to get the foundation down. And then once we go there and let's say your MatchCom's got like a ton of money, then you can tailor it however you want. But we're just trying to get that like base.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, you're right. You're 100% right. And having tried this literally a year ago, we tried going down this road only to run into the technical issues of where do you host it and how do you, where is it going to live on cloud service, and what do you do with this and what do you do with that, and how do you make sure that the information is in the right place? And not to say those things are impossible. It just takes time. It takes time to be able to dive into it. And there was a couple of things that took priority over that. So it's awesome, with a capital A, if that's how you spell it. Yeah, it is awesome. That's awesome to hear that you guys have picking up that torch. Picking up, that's not a word. That screwed that up. You have taken up the torch to be able to march forward and say, hey, here's something that's going to make an impact. And that's the most awesome part to me about just kind of innovation as a whole, is that when people look and they develop something that says, we have this problem, people have started saying, I wonder who else has this problem, because we're stronger together. Like it's gonna help us all if we all tackle this. Now, I have had people, and I'd love to hear your input on this, is that, and you've talked a little bit to it, but the more people, have you ever heard of the pizza rule?
No.
Has anybody heard the pizza rule? Dan, you ever heard the pizza rule?
The 2 pizza rule?
The 2 pizza rule, yeah. Never invite more people to a meeting than you can feed with 2 pizzas, because nothing will happen. Nothing will get done. It'll just be a bunch of debauchery of going back and forth and talking about, oh, we can't do that, oh, we can't do blah, 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 back and forth, where you kind of have to hone in on a couple of a couple of people who are motivated with a like mind to move forward. So in integrating people, across different MatchComs and organizations and whatnot, how have you worked through that challenge of having, a great idea over here and pure flack and chaff being thrown over here? Like, how have you worked through that and been able to march forward? Because I think this principle is one a lot of people are walking through, is that as you have an idea, more people want to get involved, but the more people, the more voices, and the more voices, the more confused it can get, and more progress slows down. So what have you done?
We order really large pizzas now.
New York size.
Oh, no.
No. I mean, there's definitely the challenges of that, because, kind of touched on it, is everybody wants it to be specific and perfect. And so I think, it's important to listen to them, but like, you can't be afraid to tell them no. Like, it's, again, not going to be everything. And we're trying to get an MVP, so a minimal viable product. And like, if you get too caught up, and I think that's almost where we were the first 2 years in innovations, we couldn't capture everything. And so people wouldn't do anything. And so kind of have to work through like, well, we know it's a need. And in innovation, if the did doesn't work out, you're allowed to fail and try again. So all I'm asking for people is their time and their thoughts. And so, when we manage these meetings and we have like 50 people on them, most people are adults and professionals, and they're able to like communicate what their needs are, and we'll capture it. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't meet the intent of being a foundational aspect, it might not be in that iteration. And then another cool piece is we've started to bring AFWERX into this layer, because they're going to kind of, as they mature, develop that like cross-cutting look, which is exactly what innovation is. Even though innovation's, the near and midterm, they're kind of that further out picture, but eventually I think it's all going to feed together to kind of show where that future force is posturing.
Yeah, oh goodness, that opens the door to so many more questions of what does that look like as you do start getting some of these deliverables. Well, let's do this. Let's take a break real quick. We're going to jump right back into that when we come back from break, because that's a really good launching in point of, as you start developing and as you start growing, once you get that min viable product and people see the goodness, everybody wants the goodness now, and it can't happen fast enough. So we'll talk about that right when we come back right here from Disruptive AF, your podcast of the edge of innovation. Make sure you hit subscribe and you follow along with us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the bell, or make sure you hit the subscribe button on anywhere podcasts are available, so you get more great content just like this right here on Disruptive AF.
Are you listening to this podcast and wondering what you should do to get started? Join AFWERX weekly office hours call to hear about different resources and programs available to you and the rest of the defense innovation community. Tune in at the link in the show notes every Monday at 1 p.m. Central to hear more.
Hey, welcome back to the Disruptive AF podcast, your favorite podcast about Air Force and defense innovation. I'm here with my good friend, Kinsley Trigger Jordan.
Yo!
And we are talking to Trish Marshall, who is the Innovation Project Manager for AFIMSC. I said it right.
You
did.
The
10 points.
installation.
10 points.
Yeah, way better than Trigger at that.
It was so much better than mine.
So we were hearing some really great stuff about what Trish is pursuing with IMSC, the innovation project management efforts over there with the Defense Innovation Dashboard. And actually, Jordan brought up a really interesting point about where IMSC is positioned within the Air Force and how that kind of uniquely sets them up to be aware of, what AFWERX can bring to the table. Whereas maybe like a Spark Cell or somebody down, trying to innovate within their flight or their unit might not be aware of that. So I'm sort of curious about your perspective on where we are with the, within the Air Force innovation ecosystem or the defense innovation ecosystem for that matter, and some of the lessons that you've learned about the importance of that, of being aware of and connecting into that ecosystem in different ways.
Yeah. So our ideas when we first started off came from the airmen. So it was a grassroots level innovation drive or call for topics. And that's kind of where we saw just all the amazing capabilities that the MSG airmen were bringing to the table. And, as we started bringing their ideas, like as an on-ramp into the innovation, like project management style, you're like, wow, I got to integrate into the corporate process too, to get this actually I don't want to be like a good idea fairy and then just let it die. I mean, if it needs to die, it can die. But so, you want them to go if they can. And so IMSC is uniquely positioned to kind of cut across, and see what else is going on out there. But then we have like those tie-ins to the MatchComs and up at HAF to help kind of see what program offices and where we are within the POM process and what stakeholders need to be in, because sometimes, at the higher levels, a program might be updating their software, and we have no idea that's happening at an airman, like an individual intrapreneur level. So we're able to kind of bird dog a lot of those issues and like nuances that are within the innovation cycle. So any project IMSC brings on, we don't just say, good job, here's your money and go do. Like we walk them through this process and we make sure that those stakeholders are in there. So if you're doing something with geo-based mapping, we have those people in there to make sure all the right words and all the right technologies are kind of folded in to have that that problem set possibly flourish. And so the location, and since our office is all civilian, so it's really cool because now we're getting this knowledge and kind of growing it over the next couple of years and like able to build that network within our own center to kind of really start tackling kind of these like bigger things where we think things should go for IMSC, which then again cuts across all the Air Force. So
that's such an important role. Like we talk a lot about creating an operating system or an ecosystem to enable those lower level, Air Force innovators. I did notice that in your job description as innovation project manager on LinkedIn, you do hashtag bridging the valley of death. And that just reminds me of like we have a lot of people who are really focusing on let's make this innovation thrive in the first initial phases. But there is that like gap, that sustainability gap, right? Which I think is what you're getting at. And that requires way more extensive connectivity to other Air Force offices.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, like when our airmen come with a good idea, like we want them to do the fun part. So we want the technology to take off at their base. We want them to like nerd out on whatever thing that they're trying to get after. And we want to do the boring, like, building the bridge, right? Like we want to get after the paperwork. We want to get after making sure that the right people are in the room for that airman to have the audience to like dump his or her knowledge on. And so I think a lot of times when we go through innovation, like that's the like unsexy part of it. That's the hard part. And that's sometimes where the valley of deaths kind of come in. And also like airmen have full-time jobs. So a lot of these airmen are like literally doing this because they believe in what they're doing and they know there's a need for change. And so we just want to like mitigate that. Of course, there's going to be some time commitment, but we want to mitigate that and enable them to do the fun side as a thank you for like bringing this awesome idea forward.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just kind of passionate about it. Yeah, they have a.
I feel like
Dan laughs. It comes up every time. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people that are bringing up these ideas, if you look kind of holistically across innovation, this is a point you kind of brought up that I'm not sure if it was you or Dan that said it, but it's incredibly interesting that a lot of times the spark cells are kind of personality based, because you have a person who they're the go-getter of the group. You know what I mean? They're the go-getter that says, you know what, we can do it. Yes, we can try. And they do have a passion for it. And one of the things that honestly kind of concerns me about the future of spark cells is that as visionaries, entrepreneurs, most of the time, I know we're talking project-wise, most of the time, the sustainment piece, these people who are visionaries and entrepreneurs aren't necessarily sustainment logistics people, myself included. And I know that that's my weakness. So for me personally, I know if I want something to stick, if I want a business to launch, if I want anything like that, I have to have my number two person be a logistic, data-minded person who's going to say, Kinsley, we can't do that because of this reason. Or, hey, you really need to think about this. This is great while you're giving this message, but what about your replacement? Because they're going to deliver it a different way and it may not land. Like that pitch may not last. And I think this is kind of the growth of innovation, the growth of spark cells, the growth of what we do. We really seriously have to consider how are we intentionally sustaining not just projects, but how are we sustaining the as Dan refers to it, the operating system, such that we are truly replicating ourselves in a repeatable fashion and a sustainable fashion. That spark and innovation isn't personality based, but it becomes something that it can iteratively withstand the test of time without becoming a bureaucratic sludge fest. I mean, that's the real challenge.
Oh yeah.
Not that I have an answer to it, but it's, you know, as we're discussing, that's a real challenge, because there is a, you know, when you think about it, personality based, that there's a lot of people who are these entrepreneurial and visionary type people that don't necessarily have that sustained function to it. So let's focus on that for project-based. When you're talking about a project and that logistical train that comes with it, yeah, you're right, because if there's not money, you know, we know the financial side of it. If there's not money palmed towards a project, you're going to have to make it happen on your own for about 4 or 5 years, unless somebody gets gracious with you and finds the money for you. So what is the way forward for some of these projects, and what is the way forward for sustainment wise when we realize we set budgets years and years in advance? But what happens when there's a project that we say we cannot lose this? How do you sustain that? How do you do that moving forward?
So I've seen like the small business innovation. So the SBIR program has kind of helped bridge that gap a little bit with the, you know, you have 18 years till, or 18 years, that'd be amazing. 18 months.
That'd be awesome.
After something.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
18 years though, that's back to traditional stuff. But
yeah.
That kind of gives you some legs to kind of start bringing in the right people. But I think like, as you know, the DID or whatever dashboards out there, and we start aligning what we're doing in innovation. So if an airman has a great idea, maybe it's connecting with that spark cell, and that spark cell is now mature enough or has come up with like a playbook to establish like, oh, I need to reach out to X, Y, and Z to then bring that into the fold. So it's kind of laying down that path to help that idea like navigate through. And that's kind of like, so that the digital innovation dashboard is going to have little playbooks in there so that it helps lay some continuity for, oh, I have an idea. What do I do next? Oh, I should reach out to this person, this person, this person, or organization. And that's to kind of get after and try to start scratching that itch. The problem is that people move, right? The military is very fluid. So if we can build up our spark cells or, you know, other organizations that are known to get after innovation within their mission areas, that might help bridge that gap, and then really line it out and tying it back to strategy to kind of like reverse engineer that money distribution. Is going to be important.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that, you know, like many of the problems that we face in the innovation realm and the innovation ecosystem, a lot of it just comes down to communication. What you're talking about is, you know, knowledge management form of communication, which is like, even if we just had the ability to see where we were failing in this process, failing to achieve, you know, hit the sustainment wickets on a project, or failing to, you know, fully map it out in the pre-sustainment process before we even hit that need. I think that a lot of that would come to light if we had a really good platform that showed, here are the things that we've done, here are the ones that failed, and here's the phase at which that they failed. That's why I'm excited about an idea like an actual innovation dashboard that includes all of these things. One of the things that I've said about, you know, that I've been kind of hammering on about the SBIR process for a while now is there are still a lot of things about it that airmen don't understand. You know, like how to get involved. What SBIRs have already been granted, you know, is another one that I'm like, if we had the right kind of knowledge management tools that we're getting after facilitating this kind of transparency, that alone would enable us to continue forward. But until you have a good way of communicating these things, it's impossible to know what the next step is, right?
For sure. And like with the dashboard, if you do it right, you should, like you said, be able to have that trend analysis. Like, is it a personality that's constantly killing it, or is it because you only have like O&M dollars versus R&D dollars? So now you're able to get like trend analysis, and your, you know, leadership saying, go innovate, go innovate. No, well, we can't innovate, and here's the reasons why. Or you're doing the opposite, and you're doing awesome, and here are the reasons why. And now you have the data as opposed to the emotion.
Yeah, don't get me started on data. Oh my goodness. Data is, I'll throw this out there as a discussion point. When you talk about data and innovation, the system that we have had for a long time values objective data in a certain format and fashion. But a lot of the things that we're seeing in innovation are subjective and qualitative improvements that are very hard to define in an objective and quantitative format. And this is something that we're, no kidding, just working through right now. We realize in some of these projects that the data that we could pull from this is not a true indicator of what's actually happening. So, and the system is used to seeing data in this format. So how do we create an avenue for, how do we create it so in the subjective and qualitative data that does need to be produced, how do we make that useful to people? Because there's a lot of times you sit down to the commander and he's like, where's the savings? How many days are you saving? How much money are you saving? Well, sir, that's the wrong question. We're saving 12 days. Well, 12 isn't significant. Yeah, I understand that, but what you don't understand is that we're saving, you know, 70% of redos. Or you know, we're saving ourselves 70% of the time of what we were doing because we're not having to accomplish this 2 and 3 times. But that's another thing where when you look at innovation, like innovation creates a lot of its own problems at times because of it exposes another area where we have to develop in order to get this comprehensive solution from A all the way to Z. And I've seen people kind of get frustrated and burned out because they're like, oh my gosh, every time we come up with a good idea, it creates one more problem. Well, yeah, it kind of does. I mean, that's the nature of it. But eventually you'll get to the end of the road. Eventually you'll get across Death Valley or whatever the hashtag was. Eventually you'll get there, but you just got to stay committed to be able to do it.
It's definitely a, you know, not for the faint of heart. Like, you have to have that team to kind of help you brainstorm when you do hit those roadblocks and barriers, because you're going to hit them. And sometimes the people you have to integrate with and bring along to see the idea succeed have been doing business a certain way for a certain style for a very long time. And it's sometimes hard to break away from that because they know the process so well. And it's like, if you want this to succeed, you have to do these things. And it's like, but where's my on-ramp? And like, oh, maybe that I'm now on, but now this isn't a good fit. Where's my off ramp? And not get penalized or like scare a certain like program office from trying new things. And so I think data is going to be important telling that story, but capturing the squishy stuff is hard. But that's, if you go after that total airman concept, that's what makes it, if I have to fill out less forms to do, like put my kid in childcare, that's better for me because now you gave me back, I don't know, a couple hours because it's probably going to get lost once, right? So now you're giving me time back to myself, which is like important. So how do you capture those metrics? It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
And I also think that we lack the imagination to actually understand what will be different in people's behavior when the systems are actually designed for them. When systems are, what people would engage more with this process in the future if we were to make it accessible, for example. And a lot of times when we're trying to capture the value of an innovation, that part where we're imagining futures in which people are, engaging more with the system or something, that's not captured in the metrics. We're also not capturing the very important elements of, I when I interact with this process that was designed for me, I actually feel like I belong in this workplace, which pays dividends in how we interact as a team, our morale, our motivation. So those are, as squishy as they are, and we've touched on this in past episodes, this idea of combining the quantitative and the qualitative. And from my perspective, I think a lot of the solution here is in incorporating really good user research and discovery methods, because those are designed to capture that. Here's the value that we're going for, and very, very clearly be able to describe what that value looks like. And that enables you to be flexible about what the product that generates that value looks like, which is where you get my MVP. I know whether it works or not because I clearly delineated the value we were intending to create. And it sounds like that's the process that you kind of are engaged in. Anyways, I don't know what specifically methodology you're using, but in the language that you used, we're building an MVP where we're only incorporating those things that get to the first piece of the most important value we're trying to create.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, because how we report data is probably going to be changing to senior leaders as this like MVP lifestyle or different innovations evolve. Because when you say metrics to me, I'm like, ugh, right? Like, but there's actually metrics that can matter. It's just a matter of maybe we're adjusting the way we report it to get after a different generation that's coming in and like meeting the need of something that is different, right? And so we always did something one way, doesn't mean we should keep doing it, but that's like changing kind of like that culture shift or change management, really.
It's so interesting you say that, because we have to change it. We have to change it because oftentimes it's a problem not known until it's realized. And just an example, one of the things we're talking about that's kind of data connected, there's this specific project that is very data centric focused. And we kind of raised a flag and said, hey, 1 year from now, we are going to have a major problem. They're like, what are you talking about? There's no problem. Everything's fine. It's like, no. In a year from now, people are going to be asking for proof that this has worked. And we know it's worked. And we know this process has been great, but they're going to be asking for data, and they're going to expect it in format A.
Powerful.
And format A tells them the wrong thing. And we only have a year to come up with a solution. And for a while, it was like, people were like, no, that's not going to be a problem. Well, once they started seeing like some of the indicators, and they started hearing the conversations of, hey, in about 8 months, we should have some data on that. And when they started talking, we have some of that now. And the result was, no, like those can't be the results. That's not good enough. People started realizing, oh my gosh, like we have a major problem. We have a major problem. They're speaking they're expecting Spanish, and we're giving them a tie-in, and that's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. So that's huge. Hey, in regards to the dashboard that you're talking about, how can people get involved with that? Because we have a lot of people that listen, not only just with AFWERX, but also in the innovation space, that may say, you know what, we're from a totally different branch. We're from a totally different organization, but we want to get involved with what you're doing. How can they reach out to you, Trish? How can they get involved with the project you're working on?
They can't. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, fair. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you next time.
No, they can reach out and email. They can hit me up on LinkedIn. Any of those things work, and I'll get them connected to the right teams.
Okay, great. Awesome. And that's very true. If you're new to the Innovation Network, it's a great way to be able to get connected, get plugged into the network, find the people who may potentially have the answer, or people who at least know someone who has the answer. But the worst thing you can do in the Innovation Network is just sit there by yourself on your own island and say, I have a problem, and not reach out to the people who may have a solution, because I promise you somebody does. Trish, thanks so much for being with us. Dan, you're the best. Thanks for being here, Trish.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, really great conversation. Just I really liked the idea of the digital innovation dashboard and the potential behind that. I think that like we said, a lot of people have been trying to get after that, and it sounds like you're making good progress.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Hey, if you have not yet done it, you need to do it now. Make sure you subscribe to Disruptive AF podcast right here at your edge of innovation. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the bell right over there to make sure you get notifications of when more great content just like this, just like Trish, just like innovation info that's going to help you bring solutions to the problems you have every day right here at Disruptive AF. We'll see y'all next time.